To get started, we kind of already selected our side yard area that's already fenced off as the location of our raised beds. It gets south-facing light, and it was kind of an already separated area of our yard to use for gardening. For us, it might have required a lot more work than it will for you, just because the previous owners didn't really do a lot of maintenance in the yard, so it's just really overgrown. There were tons of weeds and invasive vines all growing in the ground, and you can see me and the dogs just spent a lot of time trying to dig up all of the vines and weeds. And it is important that sits above your ground and not planting in ground. Your plants are still going to grow through your bed eventually, so it's best to get rid of any weeds or vines if you can. And then I'm quickly just going to skim over the construction part of building the bed. I have a lot more details on this in my blog post, which I will link in the video description below. But essentially, we just ended up using cedar wood board because it is the best to use for raised beds as far as wood. It's naturally rot resistant, water resistant, and pest resistant. Because we built our bed during the peak of the pandemic, wood and lumber was very expensive and very limited with what we could find. So we were only able to get 1-inch thick 8x4s. Ideally, you'd use 2 inches just because it will be, thicker. It means it'll be sturdier and last longer. But, whatever is available, will work. So also we wanted the height of our bed to be a bit taller, so we ended up stacking the 4-inch pieces to make it an 8-inch bed height and using supports to secure the height. We just did a super simple rectangle frame. There are more complicated frames or intricate designs you can do, but we just kept it as basic and simple as possible, and I have more details on that in the blog. After you build the bed, the next step would be placing the bed where you want it to go and making sure that it's level. So for us, it's hard to tell in the videos or photos, but our yard kind of slopes down a bit towards the fence. So we had to spend some more bit of time digging up dirt and kind of shifting soil back to raise that back side of the bed up. It doesn't need to be perfect, but you do want it to be relatively level. And here's just us and the dogs. They're probably digging more holes that we need to fill in. And so yeah, once that's done, you can set your bed up and start filling your layers. So the first layer is, I used just a piece of cattle wire that I had available. Going forward, I believe I used chicken wire and hardware cloth just because the holes are smaller. You want this layer to help keep critters out. I learned after I made this bed that we have voles. So another tip would be to make sure that the wire you put down is wider than the bed, so that way you can actually staple it to the inside of the bed, because they can come up from the sides as well. The second layer, I just used recycled old cardboard boxes that I had, and you want to just make sure when you're using cardboard or used boxes that you remove any tape or stickers or anything on there that's not going to break down. So the cardboard layer acts as a weed barrier, and then it also is another layer to help keep the critters out. For the third layer, we added old leaves and twigs. These were just ones that we gathered from our yard. This was in the spring, so we had just some leaf piles and, fallen sticks from over winter that we just kept and saved for the bed. These are just gonna naturally break down and provide additional nutrients to your bed over time. For the fourth layer, we, for our first bed, had to end up buying compost. We just bought an organic mushroom compost. I believe we used about 8 to 10 bags. For future beds, I was able to just use my own compost that I had in my compost pile at home. This is a lot cheaper, but at the time we did this, my compost wasn't ready, so we had to buy it. And if you need to buy it, that's fine too. And then for the last layer, we did organic topsoil. I believe we also used like 10 to 12 bags for this. You just want to make sure, you know, the number, if you're buying bags or if you're buying in bulk, you just want to make sure that you get enough to fill the bed all the way up to the top edge or even a little higher, just because once you water it and as time goes on and things break down, it is going to settle and sink lower. And you want to have as much good soil for your plants as possible. So now that the bed is filled, this is of course optional, the planning, and I personally really have enjoyed doing square foot gardening, and more details on that in the blog. Square foot gardening really helped for planning with first raised bed. You know, I started with number one, what do we really like to eat? Because I wanted it to be an edible garden, and, you know, kind of focusing on things that are more expensive to buy at the grocery store. So tomatoes, bell peppers, cucumber, herbs. And then I also did a lot of research on companion planting. So once you know what you want and what can be planted near each other, then it makes it really easy to kind of plan your garden. So in the blog, I have a lot of resources and links to companion planting and planting calendars, and it just makes it a little less overwhelming if you just know what to look up and plan in advance. So also for my first bed, since I kind of started everything a bit late in spring and we had just moved earlier that year, I did buy a lot of my seedlings from local nurseries or from the hardware store versus growing them myself. For future beds, I did end up growing from seed because I had more time, which is, growing from seed is totally optional, but it is a lot cheaper, and then, you know, you just get a lot more for your money and you have a lot more control of the growing conditions. I also did plant a few, I think I did have a few seedlings, and I also did do direct sow for things like beets and radish, because those don't really like to be transplanted. So I did plant those directly into the raised bed. For the most part, everything is planted. I did not film planting the cucumber and squash in the back row, but more or less, this is the completed raised bed just after planting, and I will share our future progress with the raised beds, because now we actually have 3 beds that are completely full, so I will have to do an update on everything. But this more or less just shows start to finish, setting up your bed, building the bed, filling the bed, and planting everything in the bed for our first time. And hopefully, if you have any questions, please leave them below in the comments, and please like and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this. Thank you.